Hi everyone, welcome to Wild Earth Ways. I'm Kat and today I'm going to be talking about shapeshifters. So in this video I will be using the way different shapeshifters are presented in the tarot to explore concepts about shapeshifting in folklore and culture. So shapeshifters has long been a topic which is very important to me. I'm fascinated by stories about shapeshifters and shapeshifting. And in today's video, I'm going to be looking at how those stories connect with our ideas about home and belonging and liminality. I'll be looking at shapeshifters in the intersection between human, the divine, and nature. I hope to talk about how shapeshifters' stories talk about relationships and what we hide and reveal of ourselves in relationships, and about uncertainty of the boundaries of the self, and especially of the body, and also about how we relate to other animals and to nature as humans through evolution and through our interactions with the natural world, and how that's changing over time, and connecting with those ideas and stories through the stories of shapeshifters. So this video was prompted by, I watched a video by Saoirse at Soaring Saoirse in which she talks about shapeshifting in her practice. And her video in turn was inspired by Lennon Smith, who made a video about shapeshifting, different aspects of shapeshifting in culture. Both of those videos are well worth a watch if you're interested in this topic. I'll leave a link to them down below. There are some overlaps between what they were saying and what I'm going to talk about, and some differences, because when it comes to shapeshifters, we're in a very diverse range of stories and ideas, and they are a kind of locus of creativity in culture. And so there are many different ways in which these stories can resonate and different ideas that they can bring up. So it may be that some of the ideas I talk about today are very familiar to you and you connect with, and others not so much. So let's dive right in. I'm going to start with the story of the selkie. This is a representation of a selkie from the Tarot of the Hidden Realm by Julia Jeffries, and the selkie is in the position of the Four of Cups. So a selkie is a being who is a seal who can take human shape. And the stories, folktales of selkies are found wherever we have seals. So I'm most familiar with them from Scotland, but they are found elsewhere as well. And in tales of selkies, we can see also a lot of similarity to tales of mermaids. Seals may be like the origin of mermaid stories, because if you've ever seen a seal looking at you from the water, you'll see that it has a very soulful gaze, almost human seeming in the way its eyes are kind of like front facing. In the water they're so graceful and they move with so much grace. They may have inspired stories of mermaids, and certainly selkies are connected with mermaids. So selkies are creatures who are liminal. They are between worlds, like a seal is between worlds. It lives in the water, but it's a mammal. It has to breathe air as well and come to land sometimes. And so a selkie is like this. It belongs both in the water and on land. And the picture which is shown here is of a woman returning to being a seal. So in the guidebook, it explains that she's returning to the water, feeling like she's coming back to her true home in the water. But that in that moment, she's also feeling uncertainty and regret because she's leaving behind the land. And in stories of selkies, we often see this tension, that they don't belong with humans, and yet when they go into the water, they're leaving some part of themselves behind. So I believe this is a very resonant story for people because of often a sense of difficulty that people may have around home and belonging. Where are you at home and where do you belong? And what do you have to leave behind to belong in one place or another? So I'm going to read a little bit from a story of the selkie. So this is from Favourite Folktales from Around the World, which is edited by Jane Yolen. And in this book, she includes a story of a selkie from Iceland. And this is kind of the classic form of the selkie folk story, which I've come across. It describes a man who comes to a cave where he hears singing and dancing, and outside of the cave there are seal skins. He takes one of those skins away with him home and locks it into a chest. And then he comes back the next day and sees a young and lovely woman sitting there, and she was stark naked and weeping bitterly. This was the seal whose skin it was that the man had taken. He gave the girl some clothes, comforted her, and took her home with him. She grew very fond of him, but did not get on so well with other people. Often she would sit alone and stare out to sea. So these people get married, they have children, and he always keeps the key to the chest where her skin is hidden, locked, and keeps it away from her, until one day he forgets and leaves it at home, and she takes the key and opens the chest and she finds the skin. She says goodbye to her children, put the skin on, and flung herself into the sea. Before the woman flung herself into the sea, it is said that she spoke these words, "Woe is me, ah, woe is me. I have 7 bairns on land and 7 in the sea." So she returns to the sea, to her true seal form, but she has to leave behind her human children to do that. So she makes a great sacrifice. But in this version, she seems to already have children in the sea who she wishes to return to. And we can see this kind of pattern in lots of Scottish ballads, which are about selkies as well, in which a man takes the skin of the woman and she then has to stay with him until she is able to retrieve her skin, and she returns to the sea, heartbroken, to leave behind children who she has on land. So I feel that this kind of selkie story speaks to our sense of duality, sometimes of not quite belonging in one place or another. And in the same way that a sea creature like a seal is sort of on land and also in the sea, we have different dualities that we have to resolve. Our mind and body, spirit and rationality, for example. And that sense of not belonging in one place or another is, in my opinion, quite fundamental to Western human experience. So really from the story of the Garden of Eden, we're very familiar with stories in which humans are in a state of exile. So humans are unlike other animals. They don't fit into their environment always. Other animals have to fit into their natural environment in order to survive. That's what survival of the fittest means. So the ones who live are the ones who adapt and fit to their environment. Humans, on the other hand, fit their environment to them. So it's not so much that we belong in a place as we force a place to belong to us. Now, that isn't all humans, it's not all human cultures, but it's dominant in the Western culture that many of us are familiar with. Like I said, it's a story that can be traced back to the story of the exile from Eden. So, for example, it makes me think of a medieval poem. So this is an anonymous Middle English poem. This is from my much-loved Middle English lyrics Norton book, edited by Luria and Hoffman. This is a poem called Fowlers in the Frith. I'm going to read it, even though I actually know this poem by heart because it's very short, but so that you can see the poem as well. Fowlers in the frith, the fisses in the flood, and I maun wax wad, mulch sorwe I walk with, for besta of bone and blood. So in this poem, so I'll translate it into modern English, birds in the wood and fishes in the streams, and I have to go mad. Much sorrow I walk with, for the best of bone and blood. This poem is talking about how the other animals, the birds and the fishes, they fit into their place where they are, but man has to go out going crazy, going mad, because he doesn't fit in. In this poem, it's recalling a line which I think is in the New Testament, where it says something like, the foxes have their dens and the birds have their nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. Apologies if I've quoted that wrong. I don't remember exactly the wording or where it is. I know it's somewhere in the New Testament. In this poem, they take this idea and then suggest that it may be that the person is sad and full of sorrow because they're in love. For besta of bone and blood, it may be the person who they're in love with. And here, besta, it could be the best, but it could also be a beast of bone and blood, like a human embodied being. Or it could be that their sorrow is for the best person that ever existed, which could be Jesus. So the idea is of a kind of human alien moving through the world, which we often see in medieval poetry, where there's this concept that we don't fit here. Other parts of nature fit, but we humans don't. And to some extent, I think that shapeshifter stories are talking to that idea of not quite fitting. And it's one reason I really love this image of a selkie from the Witch's Wisdom Tarot, in which we see a child swimming in the kelp forest. And here I get a sense that she does fit. Like, she could be the child of the selkie that we sometimes see in folktales and ballads, who is able to continue their life living on the shore. Often they would become a fisherman, very successful, and they can move between one world and the other world, the human world and the animal world, and that this gives them a kind of great peace and sense of belonging. But they just embody liminality. You can see this girl has like webbed fingers, and for them liminality is a state of belonging. I also get that impression from the Queen of Cups in the Pagan Otherworlds, in which I feel like this is a selkie. She's totally comfortable with her being. She's a poet, you know, she's a creator. She's in harmony with the sea and with the land and with her own body in this image, for me, in my interpretation of this card. So something that the shapeshifter stories are doing is turning around our ideas about where is nature and where is the divine. So in those medieval English poems, the reason why poets felt that they were in exile in the world is because of the idea that the soul's true home is in heaven with God, and that the natural world is something lower. Whereas in the folk tales with shapeshifters, that is really changed. So instead of having a hierarchy of animal, human, divine, it's clear that these beings are magical beings. They are spiritual beings, in a way more magical than the humans, who are limited compared with these selkies. So instead of having that hierarchy, instead it's like a continuous circle in which sacred energy is present in all things, certainly in all of nature, the natural world. So we can see this especially in folk tales which are directly connected with animist traditions. So for example, stories of kitsunes or fox human shapeshifters. I have a couple of fox cards here. This is the Page of Pentacles from the Ostara Tarot, and I feel like this page, to me, she seems like a kitsune, like she's gone through the ritual that takes a fox into the human form, and she's kind of stepping out for the first time in her human form. The other ones are from the Shadowscapes Tarot, in which we see lots of foxes interacting with the Fae people. Now, fox shapeshifters are found in many different cultures, but perhaps most famously in Japanese culture, where they are part of the Shinto practices and part of an animistic culture, where they are very strongly connected with the divine, but they are also tricksters. And so foxes in Japanese folktales can be malevolent as well as benevolent. So, for example, here in the Japanese Myths and Legends book, edited by Isomai and Araki, we have a whole selection of fox legends in which mostly the foxes are tricking humans in different ways. Occasionally they can help them, but mostly they bewitch and trick them. And the animal shapeshifters can actually be kind of vampiric, sort of sucking the energy out of humans. Something that foxes are especially famous for is creating illusions, for tricking people. So in this story, The Fox Woman by Keish Johnson, this is a novel, I think it was published around the year 2000, in which it's a novelization of one of the most famous Japanese Kitsune stories, in which a fox transforms into the shape of a beautiful woman and seduces a man who goes to live with her in what seems to be a palace, a beautiful palace. And he's with her for many years. They have a child together. And then his household eventually finds him, and they find him naked and half-starved, living below a hut with a family of foxes, and bring him back to his family. And it's only a short period of time, whereas he felt like years had passed. It was actually only a few weeks. And the story is about kind of the weaving of illusions. So the fox is a creature that can kind of weave illusions. And it brings up lots of questions about what is truth, uncertainty about the true nature of things, because humans have, in the story she shows how humans have surrounded themselves with so much artifice through their culture, through their clothes and homes, that we have actually like a shaky idea of what's true and what's real. And this fox illusion becomes a part of that general sense of not knowing what your true nature really is. It's a really great novel. I don't know if it's still in print. If it is, I certainly recommend it if you're interested in foxes, if you're interested in Japanese culture as well, then it's well worth a read, The Fox Woman. For me, foxes have always been very appealing animals because they were perhaps the most charismatic wild animal I would see around me when I was growing up. So I vividly remember the first time seeing a fox in my garden, and just this sort of breath of the wild that it brought with it. And in London, there are foxes everywhere. Like we used to then, like when I lived next to Crystal Palace Park, we used to hear foxes in our rubbish bins like most nights. They're very common to see around, and yet they still have this very charismatic connection to the wild. So I think that's calling upon this idea of truth, you know, what the truth is, our inner wild nature. The fox is also a hunted animal. It's an animal that has to survive and protect itself. So I think it also has an appeal to us in that sense. If we have felt threat, if we felt a need to protect ourselves and survive, the fox is a creature who knows how to do that. I was really interested recently to read this novel, The Many Lives of Catherine North by Emma Green. This is a science fiction novel in which the main character is a young woman who works for a company which projects her human mind into the bodies of other animals for research purposes. And she goes into the minds of many different animals, and including like whales, insects, birds, but she's particularly connected to a fox in this story. And the fox is an animal who connects with her sort of sense of needing to protect herself, needing to survive in a difficult world, in a hostile and confusing world. The fox is a survivor. This novel is a thriller. It's very interesting. It tries to explore some very challenging ideas, and I really admire the way in which the author tried to convey the different experiences of being embodied in different animal forms and needing to survive in those different environments that the animals find themselves, which is very different from our human experience, like I said, of trying to adapt the environment to us rather than fitting in to the environment as the animals must. I guess it's actually more common in culture that the idea of wildness is often for us connected with wolves rather than foxes. We have our stories of werewolves, of course. And when I was looking through my tarot, I didn't actually find many wolves. I had to turn to an oracle deck, Angels and Ancestors, for this she-wolf, Unleash the Wild Within. I don't know if that's because of me or if that's generally the case, that there's fewer wolves in our decks. I personally don't feel a strong connection with wolf energy. I don't know exactly why that is. I think it's probably just because I've had foxes around me far more, and also wolves are famously pack animals, whereas foxes tend to be off on their own a lot more unless they're with a close family group. But for sure, wolves speak to very rich ideas in our culture. So often wolves are talking, wolf shapeshifters are connecting with the id, with a kind of aggressive or sexual energy, which can be unleashed in this animal form. We also find this with bears. So here in the Ostara Tarot, the Knight of Swords is a berserker. He's a man who takes on the energy of the bear in battle. So this was a kind of medieval or Viking archetype in which somebody who going into battle kind of becomes crazed with that kind of bloodlust. You can see the bodies left behind on the battlefield here and is taken over by that bear energy. So in The Hobbit, the character Beorn is connected with this berserker archetype, a man who can shift into the form of a bear, though Tolkien has done something very different with it in the character of Beorn, which I really like, I must say. So I think that this character of the human-wolf connection has been talked about quite extensively. For example, we have Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes, in which she talks about the wild woman within us, who she very strongly connects with wolf energy. I found this book very interesting when I first read it, and it reminded me of, for example, Angela Carter's The Bloody Chamber, in which she rewrites various fairy tales like Red Riding Hood with shapeshifting energy, so human to wolf, in which the heroines are also shapeshifting into wolf form or going to live with the wolves as a way of freeing themselves from the restraints on women in their society that they were coming from. And similarly, in Clarissa Pinkola Estes' work, she talks a lot about needing to free yourself from certain female archetypes that she connects with oppression. So Angela Carter and Clarissa Pinkola Estes were specifically interested in gendered aspects of these shapeshifter type stories, so ways in which the wild nature of women may have been suppressed in society. So it can kind of bring to mind the story of the selkie, in which the seal skin is stolen from the woman to kind of trap her into marriage. And the answer that they come up with in the books is a kind of liberation of the wild self. So I want to stay with the ideas around gender and relationship to talk about another aspect of shape-shifting stories, which I find fascinating, which is the stories of relationships between humans and other animals, so shapeshifters, so animal wives and husbands. So stories of animal wives are found commonly in many different cultures, in which a man marries a woman not knowing that she is a shapeshifter. So this is an image from the Tarot of the Divine. It's the Three of Swords, and it shows this Japanese story of the crane wife, in which a man marries a woman who is actually a crane shapeshifter, and he doesn't know of her true identity. they have some financial difficulties, and she begins to cut away feathers from her wings to create a beautiful fabric which makes them wealthy, but it's gradually sickening her. She does this in secrecy. She hides who she truly is, but eventually the man sees her and discovers her true identity, at which point she leaves him and their marriage is over. And so what you can see in this story is all sorts of like fascinating themes actually about relationship, what we hide and what we reveal, and the line between desire and disgust. So in her case, when the true self is revealed, the relationship comes to an end. There can't be a continuation. It's not actually clear that the man is disgusted by her crane identity. It doesn't say so in any version of the story that I've read, but there are other stories in which the wife's animal identity is revealed and there is disgust involved. So, for example, there are stories in which a man marries a woman who's really a snake, or a woman who takes on the form of a cat, and these, when their identity is revealed, it's a kind of moment of horror and an end to the relationship. And it's like the reverse of the kind of Beauty and the Beast story, in which a woman marries apparently a beast, and she falls in love with him, seeing his true soul, and he then has his true self is actually human, and her love allows him to kind of recover that true human self and shift back into his human identity. There are quite a few stories along this line in which a woman marries, for example, a dragon, and gradually gets through to the kind of the human heart of the beast. And so it's like a reverse, where here her true self is actually an animal, and that brings an end to their relationship. So fairly commonly these marriages are with an animal wife, but not always. So for example, we have the story of Sedna, which is an Inuit story in which a woman, a beautiful Inuit woman, marries a stranger, and when he takes her home to his island, he turns out to actually be a bird. He's a cormorant or another species of bird, and she's horrified. She's also disgusted by the life that she has to live on this kind of rocky island surrounded by birds, and she tries to flee. She flees in her father's boat, but a great storm comes up, and her father throws her into the water to try to appease the storm, and when she tries to climb back into his boat, he cuts off her fingers, and from her blood comes many sea creatures like narwhal and whales, and she becomes a kind of goddess of the sea. So in this story, there's all sorts of fascinating layers of meaning happening. So we can see, first of all, that marrying someone who is not who you thought they were can be both ways. So it's not just animal wives, but also animal husbands. And then these marriages bring in interesting ideas about birth and the fertile body. So from her human body comes many different kinds of animals. And in these sorts of stories of relationships between humans and shapeshifters, the children which are born of these relationships have this kind of sometimes monstrous, sometimes sort of half-half identity. So this is another card from the Tarot of the Divine, showing a story from the Pacific Islands, I think, in which a woman marries a man who's actually a bear. And they have children who can shift freely between bear and human form. Unfortunately, in this story, her brothers kill her husband, but she continues to bring up her bear children, her bear human shapeshifter children rather, and after her death they actually choose to return to the forest as bears. They never feel truly at home with humans. So there are many, many stories in which women give birth to animals or human-animal hybrids. So the Minotaur is a classic example. And I think that these stories speak to all sorts of very deep ideas about our bodies. When we're pregnant and giving birth, our bodies are very animal. Like, we really feel that kind of animal nature of our physical body. I know that for me, pregnancy and breastfeeding and birth, it was a really powerful experience of my animal nature, and how wonderful and magical that is. So not at all in a negative sense, but in a very positive and empowering sense. But there's no doubt that it brings up in stories, in culture, we can see that that experience brings up all kinds of fears and questions. So there are questions about what are the boundaries of the self, of the body, which is being transgressed during pregnancy and birth. And what is it even to be human, you know? For lots of people, being human is not being animal. They'll use actually the word animal as though it's the opposite of human. And like I say, the experience of breastfeeding and birth, it can be kind of uncomfortable in this sort of realization of physicality for some people, in some stories. We often see in stories of marriages between a human and a shapeshifter that the children also are snakes, for example, or birds at some points, and that when the father sees that, that they have this kind of shock, and sometimes they then lose those children. They may go off with the mother, for example. So I find this really fascinating. I think it brings up all kinds of questions about how we relate to ourselves and our bodies, and to one another, and about human identity. So I find shapeshifters especially interesting because they remind us that we are physically connected with other animals. So, for example, our spine is evolved to move through water. We have a fish spine. Our spine is flexible to move in response to water, and yet strong. The skull, the spine, the ribs, all of this is a kind of fish skeleton left over from that stage of our evolution. And so when we move our back in this kind of wonderful flexible way that we have, that is a memory of being a ocean animal, of how we evolved in the ocean from fish. And our body holds the memory of that evolutionary process. So just as the kind of salty fluid of our bodies has evolved out of the ocean, so our skeletal structure has evolved out of the ocean. And we can see closer stages of evolution, for example, in our hands. So our human hands are evolved from our monkey ancestors. So if we look at our hands, we can see that our grip is just the right size to hold onto a tree branch that can support the weight of our body. This is because we evolved from monkeys swinging through the trees, and our human hands that we're so proud of, because we can do so much and create so much with our hands, are evolved in conversation with our monkey ancestors, but also with the trees. So in your hand, which is, like I say, designed to kind of grip a tree, you also hold the memory of the trees and what helped the tree to grow, of the sunshine, of the earth, of the water. So we find in our bodies a very strong memory of shapeshifting, how through our evolutionary history we have shapeshifted to survive, to understand the world, to interact with the world, and to be a part of this world. So for me, this is part of why I love stories in which shapeshifting is taking place, because I feel that those stories are telling our kind of great evolutionary story, the truth of who we are, the connection of human and nature. And these transformations don't just stop with evolution as it is. It's also part of our lived experience, that we in our bodies are constantly shape-shifting the elements. We take in fire, we take in the nutrients of plants, and we transform them in our bodies in different ways. So we take in the energy of the plants, which they have got from the sunshine, from the water, from the earth, and transform on a cellular level into who we are, into our human identity. So we're always connected with this kind of shape-shifting energy of life. This is the Tarot of the Abyss. I love this way in this deck that Anna Turian has shown how human bodies are part of this kind of elemental process of transmutation and transformation, and that there's a glory and a sort of majesty in this, a magic, and also sometimes that it's also kind of painful and difficult. So this experience of sort of being part of the elemental journey it's always transgressing our boundaries, our sense of who we are and what we are. And obviously the kind of ultimate example of this is death, when the body returns to the elements and shapeshifts into whatever form lies ahead. On a more sort of local level, we can experience these kind of transformations in our body and in our minds, in our identities, as we move from one stage to another stage in our lives, for example. And that process is remarkable and glorious, but it can also be very painful and difficult. So in this video, I've mostly focused on stories of beings who can shift from one state to another state, so from human to animal and backwards and forwards at will. And I haven't been speaking about shape-shifting stories in which a human is transformed into an animal and then stays that way. But of course, that's the other kind of classic shape-shifting story. So I have here Ovid's Metamorphoses. This is the brilliant classic collection of Greek myths in which humans are transformed by deities, usually into different kinds of being. So either into animals. So here on the image, we can see Actaeon being transformed into a stag by Artemis, or into trees. And in Metamorphosis, there are quite a few different stories of humans transformed into plants and trees. And there's this quite horrifying feeling of them suddenly losing their freedom and their mobility. And I have to say that this is why I've always been really uncomfortable with these images in the Shadowscapes tarot, because Metamorphosis is very familiar and beloved to me. And so when I see these, the King of Pentacles and the Queen of Pentacles enclosed in the trees like this, I feel very uncomfortable about those images, that they've become so rooted into position. I have to tell myself that she can free herself if she wishes. I don't know really. I'd be curious to know what you think, whether they are embodying trees or if they are beings that can shift in and out of human and tree form. But certainly I think that these stories and images talk to the complexity of this experience of transmutation. So sometimes shape-shifting is fantastically liberating. So as an example, I would say in this novel here, Wild Seed by Octavia Butler, the main character is able to shapeshift into the form of different animals, and this is kind of gives her this immense freedom and understanding of the world. On the other hand, we have these beings who become trapped in the forms that they're shapeshifted into, and that there is both pain and glory in the process of shapeshifting. What also interests me is the way in which shapeshifting like this is a kind of exploration of our relationship with the wild, with nature. So I love this image of the Nine of Pentacles, in which the woman is so in harmony with nature, and there's this kind of cherishing of it as she holds this bird in her hands. Stories of shape-shifting and our interconnection with nature can inspire this kind of sense of closeness, of family, of relatedness. So a fascinating example of this, which I've come across, is Staying with the Trouble by Donna Haraway, making kin in the Cthulhu. Now, Donna Haraway is a theorist. She became prominent in the 80s, I think, with her Cyborg Manifesto. She's interested in human identities and where human becomes other. And in Staying with the Trouble, she is looking at different ways in which humans are interacting with the natural world today in a time, she calls it the Cthulhu to suggest this idea in which our kind of tentacular reach is touching everything in this world as we change the climate, as we cause mass extinctions, as we cause immense pain to the animals we share this world with through the animal agriculture system and other forms of exploitation sanctioned by speciesism. Now, in Staying with the Trouble, she dives into some different aspects of life in the Cthulhu scene for humans in relation with other than human animals. But in the final section, she has a kind of an experimental science fiction story. In this story, called the Camille Stories, Children of the Compost, and she imagines a future time in which some humans' DNA is spliced with a animal species that is going extinct. And these humans become, through the generations, kind of spokespeople connecting human and other than human animal species. So Camille is spliced with a monarch butterfly. And then there are many generations of these Camille's, and in telling their story, Donna Haraway is also sort of telling an imagined future for humans in which the converging ecological crises cause complete disruption and many changes, but over time also there's a kind of learning to live in kinship with the other than human animals that survive this kind of series of catastrophes. So the monarch butterfly is doomed to extinction according to this story in this world, but kind of lives on in sort of the ghost of the shapeshifting beings who've been created from this splicing of the DNA. So I'm mentioning this story and this book, Staying with the Trouble, Making Kin in the Cthulhu scene, because I think that it draws attention to how our stories of shapeshifting are about kinship, our kinship with the more than human world and other species of animals. And that we can see in folktale that this has often caused people trouble. It's caused people to feel uncomfortable, and it raises questions about who we are as humans, who we are as individuals. For me, I feel like it's something to take great pride and joy in our animal self, to take joy in the wave motions of the fish spine, to take pleasure in the monkey hands that can be in kinship with the trees, with the sunshine, as well as with other animals, and in kinship with one another. And by embracing that, we can be in relation with the natural world, which is more alive, full of magic, full of sensation and beauty and recognition of one another. So I love this healing image in the Nine of Pentacles, and also the complexity of the journey that we see in these images, where thinking about these ideas is painful sometimes, it's difficult, but it's also transformative, and it connects us with the great story of our living earth, which we can be in relationship with. Though it's difficult, though that transformation is painful, there is the potential for more harmony and having that kind of wild power with the earth rather than trying to impose power over the earth. So not taking the skin from the selkie, but instead being in loving communion with those beings. And recognizing that the planet is our home. We're not aliens on the earth. We belong here, and we're part of the kinship of the living earth. So I've said a lot and I'm going to try and wrap it up there. If you're still listening, I'm so grateful to you for listening to me talk about these ideas for such a long time. I am hoping to share a spread. I have a shape-shifting spread, which I'm going to share on the channel in a separate video because this one's already long enough. But watch out for that if you're interested. And please leave me a comment down below to let me know what shapeshifters mean to you. Do you have any special stories of shapeshifting that resonate for you? Please let me know of any books which tell stories of shapeshifters, because I'm always fascinated to read more and learn more about this topic. So thanks so much for sharing your time with me here today. I wish you well wherever you are, and I hope to see you again soon.